Hi, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate using a 2D contour toolpath with a center drill to do some engraving. So we're going to our blocks again, so our plastic blocks that we're going to be using in class to mill on the CNC machine, except that the reason I have this picture up is because I'm actually going to change where on the block that we're going to be machining for this particular toolpath. So instead of machining on this top surface that we've been machining on in Mastercam, what we're going to do is just assume that we're going to flip the block and make the engraving on this front surface instead. Except that when we do this in Mastercam, this front surface is actually going to become our top surface. So for the purposes of our construction plane and tool plane, this is going to be this front surface will be flipped up and on top. So in other words, what we'll be doing is instead of drawing a 4-inch wide by 2-inch high rectangle on the top view in Mastercam, we'll actually be doing a 4-inch wide by only 1-inch high rectangle on that for that geometry. So additionally, as I said, I'll be using a contour toolpath and also a center drill, which these are not the typical ways of doing engraving with Mastercam, but when I first started teaching this class and learning more about Mastercam years ago, there was a machinist who used to work at the campus who actually showed me this as a pretty nice way to do the engraving within the limitations of certainly the tooling that we had back then, but also because the center drill is another one of those tools that's always loaded onto the milling machine. So again, rather than switching out, especially for an introductory class, rather than switching out tooling all the time for various tool paths, what we will do is just try to stick to things that are already loaded on there. And also this is a good introduction to using Mastercam for a type of engraving. And again, although it's not the most common way of engraving, it is pretty effective nonetheless. So I will go over to Mastercam and start out by drawing the wireframe geometry for the 4-inch wide by 1-inch high representation of the edge of the part. So in wireframe, I'm going to go to rectangle. I'm going to still center this rectangle, anchor the center to the origin. And again, so this is 4 inches wide and 1 inch high, and select OK. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put letters inside of here. When I make the letters, so I'm going to use a new function here in terms of what we've already covered in class. We've not covered this yet, the create letters function. And I'm going to create letters for the degree program that you're taking this class for, the EMET program. And so I will just create EMET in Mastercam block font out here. And then what I'll do is use a bounding box to then translate that into this rectangle so that it is centered inside of the rectangle. So I'll select this create letters, and you can see that so there's a drop down here where you can select the different styles. So I'm going to select the Mastercam block font. I typed in EMET already for electromechanical engineering technology. And I'm going to, or I also actually already put in the height as well as the spacing for the letters. So this is just something that happens to fit well inside of here. So as you change the height and the spacing of these letters, obviously you do that to conform to the boundary box of your geometry. So what I did here, though, I inadvertently left clicked. What you can see, and I'll just go ahead and X out of this so you can see it again. When I go to create the letters, as I'm just I have all the settings that I just discussed here. As you can see, as I just move my mouse around, the EMET currently follows the cursor around. So rather than dropping it in here, though, what I'm going to do is drop it outside of the part. So I just left click to place it and just drop it outside of the part. And I'm going to go ahead and select OK to that. So I want to take this though, and I want to move it inside of this rectangle, and I want it to be centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a bounding box function to create a center point inside of this set of lettering. So right now it's telling me to select one or more entities. What I'm going to do is just make a left click and drag, and then left click again, and then left click on end selection, and it selects all of these letters. I'm going to, down here where it has the rectangular settings, I'm going to select this point inside of here. And I'm also going to come all the way down here, and if in create geometry, if lines and arcs are selected, I want to go ahead and deselect or disengage that and just select or enable center point. So that's what I want. So these are the settings that I'm looking for right now. So again, it's just making sure the center point is this origin is here, and then also enabling center point, but making sure that I disable anything else here. So what that's going to do is when I select OK, it's actually going to put this center point at the center of my letters. And then I'm going to go into my transform tab and use the translate button here. And it's telling me to select the entities to translate. So once again, I'm going to make left click, drag, and left click again, and then select left click on end selection. And so that selects my letters. And I'm going to use this center point here. And so the first thing over here in this dialog box that I want to do is I want to make sure that my method here has move enabled, so rather than copy. So I don't need a copy of it out here. I need to be able to move this lettering inside of this rectangle. So the other thing that I'm going to do is down here, about 2/3 of the way down or so, there is this function called vector from/to. So I'm going to left click on this reselect box, and it tells me to select the point to translate from. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select this center point here. So there's this little crosshair here. So if you hover over it, you'll see that the crosshairs get enabled. I'm going to left click there, and then it tells me to select the point to translate to. Well, the point that I want to translate to is the origin, because that's at the center of this rectangle. So when I left click here, what happens is it moves that lettering inside of there and makes it so that it's centered. So I will select OK. And I will also just remind you to be able to go back to the same colors for the geometry. I will just go in here to the Home tab and select the Clear Colors button. So that gives me my letters inside of there. The next thing that I want to do is I want to take and move this so that this lower left-hand corner it ends up here at the origin. So I will use the transform and the move to origin and select this lower left-hand corner, and it will move that over. And once again, I can clear those colors back to the bright green that I have. So since I have this now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. So I'll do a file, save as, and I will browse out to my class prep folder, and I will just save this as engraving 1 and save. So now I'm ready to do my machining, and that I need to select my machine. So I'll go in here and select the mill, so the generic Haas 3X mill. And I will set up my tool settings as we have been. So with the warn of duplicate tool numbers and enabling all of these advanced options. The difference here, though, is going to be in my stock setup. So in my stock setup, the main difference will be the size of my stock. So once again, in fitting with the rest of the way that we've done these videos so far, we've always just enabled our stock setup to be the same size as the finished part. So in this case, again, we're all just grabbing whenever you get to the milling machine and get to projects where you're milling with the CNC machine, you'll grab one of these blocks, one of these plastic blocks, and your finished part will be essentially the same size as the block that you start with. So, in the manual machining portion of this class, we will go through a little bit more on squaring up material and things like that with a manual mill. But for the purposes of learning how to use Mastercam, how to use the CNC machine, this is the way we're going to proceed with these plastic blocks for now. So I'm going to change this just as I have in the past. I'll make this origin of my stock piece coincide with the origin out here for my geometry in this graphics area. And I'll use this all entities. And you can see that by doing that, now I've got this 1 inch in the Y direction and my 4 inches in the X direction, which means that this particular, this Z depth now is no longer an inch, but it's actually rather the 2 inches here. So just to go back to this slide and, just to remind you of all of the different parameters that we have here. So this is actually going to be a depth of 2 inches. So that's how this has changed with respect to some of the other videos that we've done where we have been machining on this top surface. Now we're making this front edge the top surface and machining that in Mastercam. So I will select OK. And then what I'll do is I will go out and use my 2D Contour Toolpath. And I'm going to use this window chaining method again. So right here where the little rectangle with the dashed lines here. And I'm going to make a window around my EMET letters. So again, left click, drag, and left click again. It tells me to sketch the approximate start point, which is very similar to when we did the window around the op round in the slot milling video. So what I'll do now is there's not really a sketch. It's really just going to be selecting a point. So I'm going to select this point right here at the top of this E. And you can see that it highlights in my EMET. So what it is that I'm trying to do is not to take, so I'm going to take the tip of the tool, the tip of the center drill, and I'm going to engrave by outlining these letters. So I'm not engraving inside of the block letters, I'm engraving the outside of the outside lines of those block font letters. So I'll select OK. And then in the tool area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my filter and I will unselect the end mill, and I have the center drill selected, and I'll look for the 1/4 inch center drill. So in this case, the 1/4 inch is the diameter of the shank, not of the tip. So the diameter of the tip is much smaller, and we'll see that here in a second. Let me just go ahead and select OK. Go to the tool library, and the one that matches, or at least comes the closest to matching what we have on the milling machine at the campus, is this number 3 center drill. So I'll go ahead and select OK to that. Except in this case, on that, on that vertical milling center at the campus, tool number 11 is actually our center drill. So once again, when you change that, you want to make sure that the tool number, the length offset, and the diameter offset all change to 11, because this is important, because this will be output to our G code. So in our G code, we're not only going to tell the machine what tool to use, but we're also going to be outputting G codes that are going to reference the length offset and the diameter offset for that very same tool. So that's very important, so that we're not running into and crashing into our part unnecessarily. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is change my feed rate. So my feed rate in this case is going to be 30 inches per minute. So I can move a little faster, certainly with the center drill to do this. And I'm actually going to increase the RPM significantly over what we've used in the end mills, and I'm going to make this 5,500 RPM. My plunge rate, I'm also going to change to 30 inches per minute, and I'm going to use a rapid retract. So in this comment, I'm just going to say that I'm going to engrave my part, and I'm going to move on to the cut parameters. So again, what I want to do is I want to take the tip, the center of that tool, the center of the tool tip, and make it go around and follow this chain. So the chain would be the outside of these letters. So what I need to do here is I need to turn my compensation type off. So I need to turn off the cutter compensation. And when I turn off the cutter compensation, the net result of that is taking the center of that, of the tip of that tool and putting it right on the chained line. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll just turn this off. And then, excuse me, finally in the linking parameters, I don't need to go very deep at all. So, but I am going to start by enabling the clearance as I usually do, and use the clearance only at the start and end of the operation. And then make sure that all of the absolute radio buttons are enabled. And I'm literally going to just go down to a very small depth. And sometimes when you machine this, depending upon the, if the tool has worn a little bit or whatever, oftentimes what I'll tell students to do is if they engrave something like this, to take a look at the part before they actually take it out of the milling machine and see that it has engraved to an appropriate depth that you can actually read the engraving. And then if not, what we can do is just go ahead and change the Z depth. And we can even do that at the controller to make it a little bit deeper so that we can actually see it. But as soon as you take that part out, especially if you don't have a work stop in, then it makes it a little bit more difficult because then what you'd have to do is go back and home the part. So that's the reason that I make that recommendation. We'll talk about that in class once we're at the milling machine and discussing how all of this is accomplished. So let me just enter in here a negative 0.05. So again, just a very small increment that I'm bringing that tool in terms of the Z depth. But again, all I'm trying to do is just engrave using a contour following the letters EMET here. So let me go ahead and select OK. And you can see the results of the toolpath here, of course. But let's go ahead and we'll run the simulation so that we can see it and see how it actually cuts the letters for us. So I'll go to the isometric view and go ahead and select this. And you can see how it then follows the letters around. So the tip of this tool is a little wider on here than it probably is even in the milling machine, though it's very close. Sometimes, depending upon how deep you go, the letters may not come out as nicely, and sometimes they look a lot different than they do here in the simulation. So we're actually going to be getting an engraving tool here, I think, fairly soon. So that's something we can experiment with in the class. But again, this was just a quick, easy way to do some engraving with a tool that's already loaded onto the milling machine on campus, but also give you another look at using cutter compensation, turning cutter compensation off, and using that 2D contour toolpath to do something other than a contour around the outside of a part or as a slot or something like that. So once again, hope you enjoyed this video and hope it was helpful, and see you in the next video.